Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Winnie Stackelberg, and I'm the Executive Vice President of External Affairs here at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And on behalf of everyone at CAP, I want to welcome you to this incredibly important conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize the members of our Generation Progress Action team who inspire young people nationwide to embrace and advance progressive values for all their hard work and for making this incredible event possible. Thank you. I also want to make a quick note on today's program. We were originally expecting Senator Cory Booker to join us to deliver a keynote address, but he's now on the Hill fighting against a Republican tax cut plan that would deliver a massive handout to millionaires and billionaires like Donald Trump and the members of his own cabinet, one that would come at the expense of working and middle-class Americans. So while we're disappointed that he's not here with us today, we're pleased that he's fighting the good fight on Capitol Hill. Fortunately, the senator has been gracious enough to record a video message that we'll share on our website a little later this afternoon and send out to all attendees. So you will be able to hear from Senator Booker directly about his commitment to this issue and his leadership. We've gathered here today because we understand the enormous stakes in the fight to protect the nearly 800,000 dreamers whose lives have been endangered by Donald Trump. Over the past 5 years, under the protection of the DACA program, these young people have had the chance to pursue their own dreams and to help forge a stronger country for all Americans. They're serving with honor in our armed forces. They're growing our economy as entrepreneurs and as employees at Fortune 100 companies and small businesses throughout this country. I have the great privilege of working with several members of the CAP team who are dreamers themselves, and I'm personally inspired by their passion for service, their courage in the face of such profound uncertainty, and their exceptional contributions to our organization and to their world. Thank you to each and every one of you. Of course, we also know that many dreamers are hard at work in the classroom, striving to earn a better future for themselves and for their families. According to a recent survey conducted by CAP and its partners, more than 320,000 DACA recipients are currently pursuing higher education. And more than 90% of DACA recipients who are now in school credit the program with encouraging them to pursue these opportunities. So it's clear that our colleges and universities play a vital role in creating an environment where these young people can learn, grow, and graduate in peace. That's why our Generation Progress Initiative has introduced a series of steps that all leaders in higher education should take to support every dreamer and every undocumented student. They include providing these young people with access to crucial resources such as housing and financial aid, and ensuring that campus security acts as a safeguard for its students and not as an accessory of a federal deportation force. We've also launched a new toolkit for student organizers who are working to support and empower classmates who are currently at risk. This kind of leadership will be a huge part of our nation's push to strengthen protections for dreamers and for all undocumented students. And it will take all of us, outside advocates, school administrators, and campus activists, to let Congress know that it can't wait to pass the DREAM Act. That's why CAP is so proud to host today's discussion. And it's why I'm honored to welcome these amazing panelists here with us this afternoon. They're leaders in a grassroots movement working tirelessly to open the doors of opportunity for undocumented students. Laura Amico-Soltis is the executive director of Freedom University, an incredible institution that was founded after the state of Georgia banned undocumented students from attending its public universities. Shapri Lamaglia is the Vice President of Government and External Relations at the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. Monica Seabury is the founder of City University of New York Dreamers, and Juan Bellman is an organizer with the University Leadership Initiative in Austin, Texas. And now I have the pleasure of turning things over to Charlotte Hancock, the Program Director for CAP's Higher Ed Not Debt campaign. Thank you all, and please join Charlotte and the panelists on the stage.
Awesome. I think we're just going to go ahead and get started because these people are why everybody's here today. So, Amiko, I think I wanted to kick it off with asking you a question. I would say that the reason that we're really even here today is because, and talking about legislation and programming on college campuses, is because of the work that your organization identified in Georgia back in 2011 when Georgia shut the doors to their undocumented students in the higher education world. Freedom University was founded by a coalition of undocumented students and allies and has been dubbed an underground university. Based on your experience at Freedom U, what urgent needs should colleges around the country be most prepared for?
That's a great question, and thank you for coming here today to everyone in the audience. I'm glad you mentioned Georgia, and it's important to talk about the context in which undocumented students and myself are struggling in the state of Georgia. Georgia is ground zero for the undocumented student movement. We have some of the most restrictive policies against undocumented immigrants more generally, but also against students and access to higher education. We have Georgia HB 87, which was an Arizona copycat bill that was passed in 2011. We have Policy 416 and 434 that bar undocumented students from public higher education. And just this last April, our Georgia legislature passed HB 37, which was the first anti-sanctuary campus bill against private universities for passing sanctuary policies and protecting undocumented students. For all those reasons, the Southern Poverty Law Center concludes that Atlanta is the most dangerous state for undocumented immigrants in the country, and so that is where we are working from. In terms of what we've learned at Freedom U is an underground freedom school for undocumented students. We provide completely free college-level classes, college application and scholarship assistance, and social movement leadership skills for undocumented students to fight back against these policies. And what's really important in terms of how colleges are preparing to protect undocumented students is that, that there are different kinds of undocumented students. There are some with DACA, 800,000, who are under immense pressure right now since DACA now serves kind of as a registry for undocumented young people for this government, but also 1.2 million undocumented young people, almost 2 million who are college age, who are around the country who are fully undocumented. And in states like Georgia, where these policies have been in place for 6-7 years, it means that young people, undocumented young people, are now going through middle school and high school thinking that they're banned from college. And so colleges need to recognize that students from locked out states in particular were under extreme stress and also did not have access to college and college counseling in middle school and high school. So that will likely impact their SAT scores, their grades, and so that there are different kinds of undocumented students. And immediately after the election, Freedom University students disrupted a Georgia Board of Regents meeting at 9 a.m. on November 9th, right? So one of the first direct actions of the Trump era was undocumented young people in the Deep South, right? And that's really important to recognize. And they were at the forefront of the sanctuary campus movement, and specifically at the campaign at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. They articulated three things that Emory and other private universities across the country should implement in order to protect undocumented students. And it was based on three ideas. To welcome undocumented students. You can't say you're going to protect them if you don't have any. Welcome undocumented students, protect them, and then support them. Welcoming them by making sure they have equal access to admissions for both DACA and undocumented students. To protect them by requiring a signed judicial warrant for any police or ICE agent on campus and dormitories. And to support them by having equal access to legal representation and legal clinics, mental health support, and housing. And we are really grateful that the Center for American Progress has put forth similar demands for higher education. But from our perspective in Georgia, those are the important things that private universities can do to support our students.
Yeah, I would say, Monica, I know you can speak specifically to implementing some of what Emiko just discussed. In your work with the City University of New York, you secured dedicated funding for DACA student scholarships. You worked with institutions to build the pipeline that allows graduates to find employment. Can you talk through how a university can provide those kinds of resources and how important those resources are for the students that you work with?
Right, so a little bit of background about the City University of New York. It is the largest urban university in the country, but also we are the home to more than 6,000 undocumented students. And the public institutions in New York, SUNY and CUNY, hold more than 8,000 students. So the way that we went about it was really leaving and bringing the experiences of undocumented immigrants regardless of their immigration status, so DACA and non-DACA. And as it was mentioned before, there are different kind of educational status within the undocumented movement. So we had students who were proficient in English or were just learning English for the first time. So what we did was we first called a meeting together and said, where is it that we need to improve and what is it that we need to do? And so what we learned was that all of us had different experiences and we all had access to different opportunities. So by bringing all of us together to the table, we said, well, maybe I am not having the same resources in the College of Staten Island, but the Bronx Community College has access to the Dream.US scholarship, which is a national scholarship that right now the City University of New York is the #1 recipient of all those scholarships. In 2015, we actually had more than 500 students enter the CUNY system with those scholarships for associates and their bachelor's degrees. So what we did really honestly was building on and fighting the status quo in each campus and what are the resources available, and then taking it on to the next level. Who do we need to talk in the university to make sure that these resources are being expended and getting the right proper information and the different institutions, especially student affairs and academics who were directly working with undocumented students. A couple of other things that City University provides, and just looking back at the fact that even private institutions that have access to hiring their own lawyers, giving out scholarships to undocumented immigrants, we don't have access to that. So City University of New York cannot provide financial assistance to undocumented immigrants because we're a public institution. We have to abide by city and state laws. And so what they've done, though, is constantly participate and advocate for the New York State DREAM Act, putting resources behind, making sure that that is included in the legislative agenda. And one of the biggest things for us in terms of providing assistance for DACA recipients, in particular what just happened with the deadline of October 5th, we actually were going crazy because we had so many students who needed assistance, but also because we didn't know where to send them. But the university has a program called CUNY Citizenship Now, which is the largest program to provide legal services to students and their families in the country that is based at a university. And so they immediately took action and created clinics and different workshops and sessions, and even allowed for open visits with lawyers in the different institutions to go and get legal assistance to apply for their renewals. And they were very progressive in reaching out to different organizations and of different institutions to get their fees covered for. So we had an immediate rapid response to this kind of actions because we already had established this relationship between undocumented immigrants trusting the university that they're actually going to provide those services, and the university with all these other resources that they already had. So that's how we have implemented and make sure that we are getting the right kind of resources.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You guys have worked really hard, and I mean, we've seen a lot of the stuff that you've been doing. Shapri, the schools in your network have also already taken some of the actions that Monica just mentioned. The Council for Christian Colleges and Universities represents a diverse group of campuses around the country, including states where immigrants face additional hurdles in accessing higher education. With that, how have you engaged university leaders in pledging their support for undocumented students, particularly in states represented by congressional leaders who may not have yet come out in support of legislation like the DREAM Act?
Well, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be with you all to speak about this important topic. We as Christians believe that all persons are made in the image of God, and therefore they're endowed with dignity from their Creator. And so that's led us to want to care for persons who don't have protection from the law right now. And so we've seen our schools do some really amazing things in the past few weeks. We've seen schools have presidents and chaplains and their mental health professionals and their financial aid counselors meet together with groups of students to both let them know that they're supported and also to help them figure out exactly how to navigate the future. We've also seen many campuses having prayer vigils on their campuses with and for their DACA students. One campus advertised their prayer vigil by saying, "We want our DACA students to know that they're seen and that they're loved." And we've also seen students with the support of their administrators gathering together to host town halls on campus to coordinate efforts to write their local congressional delegations. We've seen them having immigration lawyers to campus to help give advice and information to students. And we had some presidents come and actually bring Dreamers with them back in January to some meetings that they had on Capitol Hill. At the CCCU, we've supported the DREAM Act since it was first introduced in 2001, and we partnered together with a number of other organizations in two specific coalitions, one called the Evangelical Immigration Table, and the other one called the Protect Dreamers Higher Education Coalition. And so we've partnered together with other organizations, and dozens of our schools have joined us in supporting and writing Congressman and President Trump and advocacy and work through those two coalitions in particular.
That's fabulous. I know that you guys have a special voice and perhaps are able to use your platform in ways that other people may not be able to in the movement. So it's really great. Juan, you recently graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, where you worked to build community support systems for students who were able to seek degrees under DACA. With a climate in which the administration is actively tearing families apart and students in the line of fire are trying to figure out how they're going to complete their schooling and their degrees, what do the conversations look like with the Dreamers and undocumented students that you work with?
So I think in Texas, we're in an interesting position because there is some support for our undocumented students. In Texas, in 2001, we were able to have HB 1403 that allows undocumented students to access higher education, pay in-state tuition, be able to receive Texas grants. But now I think what students are facing is not being able to access, like being able to work with DACA being rescinded. A big thing that I think we're trying to figure out right now is we have a lot of Dreamers from the Valley, so south of the, like near the border towns. And these students are facing the reality that they're gonna have to choose whether to go back home or finish their degrees without seeing their families while they finish their degrees, because once DACA is gone, they won't be able to cross that checkpoint back and forth. So we're trying to figure out how are we gonna support those students with housing, how are we gonna support those students with more financial stability, because many times those students were able to live, provide for their housing because of DACA. So now that the program's gone, we're gonna have to try to figure out housing, we're gonna try to figure out food, basic necessities that a lot of students have. And also many of these students are gonna have to decide whether they wanna remain on campus and finish their degrees at universities such as like UT, or go back home and try to figure out what they're gonna do. So it is a reality that we're facing, that and just like all the enforcement that's happening with us before, trying to make sure that students are protected and safe on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. Shapri, Juan's experiences really underscore the reasoning behind your network's advocacy for legislation. The council has been publicly supportive of the DREAM Act since it was introduced. Can you tell us more about CCCU's longstanding support of undocumented students and the role that faith plays in that decision? I think it's really interesting. A lot of the Republican members of Congress would consider themselves Christians, so I'd be very interested to hear your take on this.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we believe that all persons are endowed with dignity because they're created by God. And so part of that, too, is we think God has uniquely created each person with skills and talents and abilities, and we're educators. So we want to help people live into that. We want to help prepare people for that. We want people to have every opportunity to use the education they've been given to work and to provide for their families and to contribute to our society. and their communities. We also believe that every person is loved by our Heavenly Father. And so as a result, we feel like our role as Christians is to help make sure that that love is extended to them. Pastor Rick Warren, I think, said it really well when he was asked about this. He said, you know, the church's job is always to show compassion. He said, in the story of the Good Samaritan didn't stop and say, are you legal or are you illegal? The Good Samaritan helped. And so we are instructed by that as well. My colleague noticed that the church across the street here when we pulled up has the banner out in front with the scripture Micah 6:8. And that scripture says, there's a question is posed. It says, what does the Lord require of you? And the answer is Micah 6:8, which says, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And we believe that biblical justice has to do with holiness and righteousness before God, but also when you look at biblical justice, it has to do with caring for those who have the least opportunity, the least power, the least influence. And so we're instructed by that, and we feel called to work in a way that does justice, but at the same time loves mercy. And so that's really our call and what's really our guiding force behind our work.
So, Amiko, Shapri speaks to dignity, humanity, justice. In your work throughout the movement, you've identified several barriers to those basic rights that documented and undocumented students and communities have when entering the higher education space. Can you talk through some of those problems and through what institutional solutions Freedom U has formulated that you think could be applied on a broader scale?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing the perspective of dignity, because in addition to being the foundation of many faith traditions, it's also the foundation of universal human rights. The idea that all people have inherent rights and dignity by virtue of their humanity, not what side of a man-made border they may have been born on or may have crossed in their lifetime, but that they have that inherent dignity. And at Freedom University, we teach a universal human rights framework. So students don't think that they are outside of the law or that they don't have rights, which impacts their sense of basic human dignity and worth. And so using a universal human rights framework, we even have, the passport-looking Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the students joke, this is our new passport. But within that Universal Declaration, there's 30 articles. Article 26 is the right to education, which was proclaimed in 1948, saying that all people have the right to education and access to higher education shall be based on merit. Right? And we are in a system in which access to higher education is based on a social status and not one's academic merit. So they recognize that this is a violation of their human rights. Within this violation of rights framework, we also know that Article 25 is a right to an adequate living standard and necessary for human dignity. And this includes access to food, clothing, housing, medical care, these things that we're talking about that universities can help provide to students. This is a human right. This is a basic human right that's not recognized in the United States. But in addition to that, there's also the right to economic justice, to favorable working conditions, the right to be able to work, right, which is Article 23, and also the right to participate in one's government and to engage in public service, and that's Article 21. So if we're talking about employment and voting, we also have to be critical of the fact that 11 million undocumented people, the vast majority of whom pay taxes, sales taxes, the individual tax ID number, they have paid more than $10 billion in the last decade into the Social Security Trust Fund. We have a situation in which we have taxation without representation, right? Looking at the larger picture of what DACA has done, which has legitimized in states like Georgia an entire population of young people of color with DACA who can legally drive to their low-wage jobs, but be denied access to higher education and the right to vote, right? And we have seen this long system of injustice throughout the United States history, but it has become normalized, sometimes with things like DACA, and yet we're at a reality in which DACA itself is being repealed. And so I think this is a time to have bold conversations about visions beyond DACA of a Clean Dream Act, but also for all the 11 million undocumented immigrants. If we care about family values, we should not be pulling parents apart from their children, right? And so this conversation based on basic human dignity and justice is essential in this conversation.
Absolutely. Monica, I would say that Dreamers are right now, they're millennials, they're young people, and Winnie spoke about sort of like them leading the fight here. Can you talk a little bit about some of the young people you've worked with and how they're sort of leading the charge and what you see them doing every day on the forefront of these sort of battle lines?
Right, so I really appreciate that question. I was thinking, how am I going to make it fit in this kind of conversation? Because before I came, I had a very heated conversation with an administrator who, kept referring to undocumented immigrants as dreamers. But according to their definition, dreamers are only recipients of the Dream U.S. scholarship or only DACA students. The dreamer terminology was born out of the movement to create a good image for an undocumented immigrant, so then eventually they can pass the DREAM Act. That's where this came from. So in fact, if we look at it, yeah, it does refer to that piece of legislation that described dreamers as undocumented immigrants who came to the country before the age of 16. So technically, I'm not a dreamer. Have I used the terminology to be able to organize and to be able to provide resources to my community? Without a doubt. I embrace the terminology because it saved me, it protected me, it gave me the opportunity to organize without fear or deportation. And so as we start looking at what are the dreamers and who are they, really, these are allies, these are people that just want to be able to give, like she mentioned, undocumented immigrants the human right to live with dignity in the country. And so in terms of this definition, we really need to look back and say, who are these people? So these people are just normal people. They're human beings that want to have a future in this country. And so dreamers is in terms of that terminology. And in terms of New York, what are we doing? Who are they? I have so many stories to share, but one of them in particular is of a young mother who was about to not finish her college education because she didn't have the money to come back to school. But what she did was she received DACA, was able to work, was able to make money. Now she takes care of her kids because she has a full schedule at work. She has time for her to go back to school. So it is different stories. It is different kind of people. And it is helping a community from different angles and different ages. It is true that the movement, it's, I will say now in this time, becoming again what we used to have, which is, we are mobilizing between the millennials, the adults, and everybody that really cares about making sure that we have immigration laws that protects everybody. So at CUNY, we are absolutely diverse. I mean, our school is from people who are they just got their DACA status before everything that happened, to people who are now moving out of DACA status because they were able to take advantage of advanced parole and they adjusted their immigration status. So we have part of that system of building that pipeline and building the network. And if you take it back to your university and your different states, for all of you that are student organizers, is making sure that you don't think about your immigration status as something that's permanent. This is something that's going to change eventually. And what we've done is make sure that you are ready to take advantage of that when that comes into place. So when DACA came into place for us, we were all ready to take on the next step and apply for those jobs because we had our resumes ready, because we were ready to know how to send emails to request for those jobs and all of that.
Here. Amiko, I noticed you nodding a lot during that. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Thank you for your hard work, and you as well, Juan. I have the incredible privilege of working with undocumented students every day. And I wish so many other citizens in this country could see what I see, which is regular human beings who feel the broad range of emotions. We laugh a lot at Freedom U. Sometimes humor and joking is how we get through all of this. But
I like the FU, by the way.
So Freedom University's acronym is FU Georgia, which we wear this to protect ourselves sometimes in the state. But yeah, things will change. But at Freedom U, we develop a critical consciousness, which means that people recognize that there is an injustice going on, that it is not simply a matter of individual law breaking, right? That this is part of a larger social system that works to recreate exploitable people who can work and not be protected, and who pay taxes into the system, who grow the economy, but are excluded from the political process. That we encourage students to have a human rights framework in thinking about their dignity and the rights that they do have, even in the United States, as undocumented young people. And most importantly, this idea that things can change, but it will happen through collective action. And that is why I'm so excited to be here having this conversation with how we can organize and how we can build power from the grassroots.
Absolutely. Juan, do you have anything to add on that? I know you've been sort of on the forefront of this as well in Texas.
I mean, we just seen a lot of students just like go out. Many of them like come out now and speak, sharing their stories, whereas before they would just go to school, get a job. But now we've seen a lot of those students share their stories. We've seen a lot more students that weren't involved in the movement come out and share those stories because this is something that's impacting everyone. And it's beautiful to see like all the different people who would never be involved in the movement to come out and share their stories and really get active in all of this.
Absolutely. Juan, what do you want Congress to know about how a Clean Dream Act would impact the documented and undocumented students that you work with? What would you tell them, given, you know, if somebody's watching the live stream right now?
So I think it's really important to think about a Clean Dream Act. Back in 2011, I had the unfortunate experience. My father was coming back from work. One of his coworkers forgot to put on his seatbelt, and because of that, the police stopped them. The coworker couldn't produce an ID, so they detained all of them and sent them with ICE. ICE intimidated all of them, including my father, to sign a voluntary departure. My dad did not sign this voluntary departure, and he was placed in detention, where he spent about 30 days while we were able to raise the funds to pay for his immigration bond. After that, it was a legal battle that lasted a couple years. So between all that time, like 2011 was my first semester at UT. I went in as an aerospace engineer, but I couldn't think of like my problems in calculus. I couldn't think of my problems in physics. I couldn't focus on my education because my family was going through this situation. My family was going through the decision of what's gonna happen to us, what's gonna happen to me. Is my father gonna be deported? Is my family gonna have to leave? Am I gonna have to go with them? And it was a reality that I was facing that none of my peers knew about, that I didn't really knew anyone who I could talk to because at that moment I wasn't plugged in the movement. So it's something that we need to think about when we're thinking about what bills we're gonna propose, because we don't want something that's gonna impact the mental health of students, something that's gonna deter them from focusing on their education. I ended up changing my degree to something more complementary to the work that I was doing in activism. So I ended up graduating with an anthropology degree, which was wonderful because many of my professors in the department really helped me to focus on that work that I was doing, and it really complemented what I was doing. So I was learning and reading about this kind of work while also going and being active outside. But what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, we're all gonna benefit from bills like this. Not just undocumented immigrants, not just dreamers, not just DACA recipients, but everyone. Because when me as someone who's undocumented who would benefit from a Clean Dream Act, when I think about who I'm gonna help, I think about like all those teachers that were there to support me. I'm thinking about all my peers who I've had a pleasure to grow up with, and many of them are citizens, many of them are residents. They all have different kind of status. But when we think about who's gonna benefit from this bill, it's gonna be a whole community as a whole. Because when we're not thinking about going back to our home country, because we like it here. We love our cities, we love our communities. We've loved the people that we've grown up with. So a Clean Dream Act will not only benefit me, will not only benefit my parents, but it will benefit our community as a whole, because we're gonna have more students focusing on their degrees. We're gonna have more students being able to contribute to this country and being able to contribute to society as a whole. So I think it is important that we all focus on that and we all try to pass a Clean Dream Act, because at the end of the day, we're all gonna benefit from that.
Absolutely. Shapri, what do you see CCCU's role as in sort of complementing what Juan just mentioned, how can colleges and universities, particularly those in your network, really step up and sort of make sure that they're supporting this sort of thing as well?
Yeah, we have seen, I think I've been really encouraged by is that it's not only the colleges and universities, but it has been the broader religious community across a lot of religious communities, but also specifically to the evangelical community. There was just a letter sent in mid-September that was organized by the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention that was signed by over 3,000 evangelical pastors and leaders that was sent to all the leaders of Congress. We have seen in polling that 68% of evangelicals support a path to legal status and ultimately citizenship for not just Dreamers, as you said, but all undocumented persons here that, you know, with certain differing in all the different kinds of legislation of different little tweaks as to what the requirements are there, but the principle of that. And so I think colleges, universities are in a special position because we have Dreamers on our campuses, but churches have Dreamers sitting in their pews, and employers have Dreamers working for them, and parents have children whose friends are Dreamers. And so this really is something, as you said, Juan, that affects everyone in every community. Knows a Dreamer or knows someone who knows a Dreamer, and or an undocumented person generally. So we're working, yes, in all the ways I mentioned earlier, but also alongside the broader religious and specifically in our context, evangelical community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Monica, as someone who did not benefit from DACA, what is the message that you have for lawmakers as they consider legislation that would create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented youth?
I will start by saying them to start creating that legislation. They're not doing that. I mean, they're not looking at the opportunities that they have. It is clear that without Democrat voters, and especially, you know, with the support for adopting a budget. I mean, look what they're doing right now, right? There needs to be Democrats at the table who are going to also help them pass their legislation. So why not take advantage of the fact that they need them to be able to advocate for something else? But I'm not going to be selfish. I know that right now the discussion is around the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and I strongly believe that if we do not get immigration reform, we can start working on organizing by pieces. I know a lot of people think that we shouldn't advocate for pieces because why are we doing that? Why are we giving them our dignity? Why are we letting them play with our lives? Absolutely agree. But I saw the powerful impact of legislations like DACA in my own university and my own city. I have students who right now I can reach out to who are graduates, who are working at the mayor's office, who are building and protecting undocumented immigrants in my city because they were able to receive DACA. So if I want to make sure that we are protected and we advocate for an immigration reform, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that these undocumented immigrants get a chance to be in positions of power to advocate for the rest of us. So you never know. We have 2 congressmen right now who are formerly undocumented immigrants, who are clearly up there making sure that we're represented. Maybe next year we have, you know, more formerly undocumented immigrants. So the goal really is for us to be educated politically, civically, and also pay attention, and especially now with everything that's going on, it's how healthy our undocumented immigrants are, making sure that they are participating in mental wellness trainings, workshops, so then not only they are receiving the proper support, but they're also able to advocate, because without feeling, you know, healthy and wealth, you're not going to be able to come to presentations like this or attend rallies or write letters or even graduate. And so my call to action for them is to, if you really want to do something for all of us, start talking about it. And if it's not, then get the DREAM Act passed and get a clean DREAM Act, because we really do understand that they have the power and the votes to demand things like that. And President Trump, I mean, who are we kidding right now? He was a supporter of Dreamers. He's met with Dreamers before. Why has that changed? Maybe because he doesn't have the political support that he thought he was going to have as a president. So maybe we start taking advantage of that too, that he changes his mind a lot. And I was told that I'm allowed to say this kind of things in here. So, you know, start talking and start pushing towards that. And I think we should start looking at his supporters and where the funding is coming from. Right now, I actually have one of his people in New York trying to get a congressman reelected who clearly now is very open and opposes immigration reform because he wants to get reelected. Since when did we allow things like that to happen, especially in New York? So call your congressman right now. Forward.us has an amazing campaign also going on to making sure that you are calling your congressman. So go to their website, get involved, make those phone calls, make sure that your friends, especially you citizen friends, start making those phone calls for you.
Absolutely.
Us.
Sorry.
For us, for all of us.
Absolutely. Amico, what would you say the young people you work with, what are the first steps to getting engaged? I know that the people you work with are sort of like already there, but for people who are trying to figure out how to get plugged in, I know we have a toolkit on Generation Progress Action's website that tells people how to do this, but do you have like a 1, 2, 3? Like what do you normally tell people who are sort of figuring things out?
For documented folks, documented allies, follow the leadership of undocumented youth. They're well organized across the country. Meet with them, ask them how you can help in your local area, in your local state. At Freedom U, what makes us special is that despite being in Georgia, this past legislative session, not only was the anti-sanctuary campus bill passed, but so was a gun bill to have guns on campuses. So in Georgia, guns are allowed in public universities, but not undocumented students, right? So even though we are under such immense discrimination in Georgia for undocumented students, they built the alternative, right? So organize locally at Freedom University, in addition to providing these college-level classes that are completely free to students and this college and application assistance. We also have a mental health network, right? And we organized it. We didn't get permission from anybody. We had mental health professionals organizing themselves and someone who could train them in cultural competency and then match them with our students. So we can have local solutions while remaining connected to a larger network to organize collectively for federal legislation. But we can create the solutions that we want on the local level, and Freedom U shows that that's possible.
Absolutely. I don't know if anybody had any final points they would like to, go right ahead.
I'm totally going to add to that, and that's especially for young adults who are starting to organize or want to get involved. And as Juan mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people that are coming forward and sharing their stories, and as we say in the movement, coming out of the shadows. But you need to be careful. Coming out of the shadows is not just saying, I'm undocumented, here I am, let's do this. You gotta be careful. You gotta make sure that there is a network to hold you back if something happens. You know that there's a lot of people out there right now that's clearly not supporting our efforts. Also, you wanna make sure that you do it in a way that you are also feeling comfortable, that you're not doing it just because there's a famous hashtag going on Twitter, or that's the topic that right now everybody's talking about. We had a recent incident in our university where someone came out and said things that didn't match what the movement is about, and now the person is stepping back and trying to reflect on that and learn more, but that it's a process that could potentially pull students from coming forward and advocating. The 3 things that I recommend everybody to do is, 1, really start appreciating the work that you're doing. Because you, by getting an education, by being with your parents, by respecting people, you're already taking a step in building a movement and creating a narrative that shows who we are and what we do. 2, get educated. I know we don't want to pay attention to the news. I know I don't want to watch Fox News, but I have to, because I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what is it that what's the image that they're creating about us, then I can argue back and say, this is what you're doing wrong. This is where I don't fit in your narrative. And then 3, find the network of support. And if you don't have it, build it. That's what we did at the City University of New York. We had CUNY Dreamers. It was literally just a meeting within an undocumented network throughout the 24 campuses, and that's where this was born. You just need to be able to do those 3 things, and then later, it's all about making sure that you are also developing as a professional, as a person, because all of us, as we are trying to be organizers, are also building for what comes after. So something that, and I'm going to say his name, Alan Wernick, said to me when I was a senior in college, and said, you know, keep your eyes on the prize. Like, what is the purpose? Keep that prize in front of you and make sure that you follow through so you get there. Do not get distracted by what Trump is saying, what this negative rhetoric about immigrants are. Focus in where you're going, because clearly we can do it.
Awesome.
All right, just wanted to double check. Well, thank you so much to all of you for being with us today and for taking the time to travel from all over and coming to share your expertise with the people here in the audience. I think one of the things that you said really spoke to me about tweeting and calling your members of Congress. So I'm going to ask everybody who has Twitter to take out their cell phone right now. I'm watching. Everybody who has a voting member of Congress to take out your cell phone and tweet your support for the hashtag DreamActNow to your senators. We're using Here to Learn as the event hashtag, but also DreamActNow. And let them know that you are supportive of the Dreamers in your community and the undocumented students in your community. All right, I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, so we can take a couple of questions. Yes, right here in the front.
Thanks. I'm Peggy Orchowski. I cover Congress for the Hispanic Outlook on Higher Education. I've been covering Dreamers for over 10 years. And, you know, it's a very sympathetic group. But I understand it's very split between those who say, let's at least just get the DACA people legalized, and between those who say, no, we want everything. It's got to be our parents. It's got to be all the 11 million. So in doing that, how do you talk about rights? Because, of course, immigration is not a civil right. Hate to tell you, but it isn't. And, of course, it's not a civil right to be in the country illegally. So it's hard to make a civil rights argument. And it's not a human right either. In the charter of the UN, it says it's a human right to leave your country. But it's not a right to come into any country just because you want to. You need the permission of the country to do that. So what rights are you talking about? How do you argue the rights issue?
Undocumented students speak. You go first. So to clarify your question, you're asking what is the rights argument? So you mentioned about the split, right? I think that that's kind of a false narrative. I don't think people are battling against each other. I think everyone does want comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. The conflict is the strategy to get there, right? And I'm not going to speak for anybody else. From what I've heard in Georgia, undocumented students think that, yes, a Clean Dream Act should pass, but that shouldn't be the end of the battle, right? The fight. That covers 800,000 students who have qualified for DACA, but not the 11.2 million undocumented immigrants. In terms of rights and the UN Charter, that is the riddle of human rights, where, yes, it is very clear in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all people have rights. And you are talking about, yes, the right to a nationality and the right to free movement. People forget about Article 13 and the right to free movement in and out of countries. But the riddle is, how do we have universal human rights with states that implement them, right? And so the Universal Declaration is not a legally binding document, as you know, right? But it is meant to serve as a parent of law, to inspire future laws. And those things can change through collective action and through the visionaries of the next generation. And I think as a teacher that I need to respect those visions of undocumented young people and the world that they want.
Next question. Okay. Right there, second row.
I know.
Hi, I was just wondering how you feel allies should be in terms of going and trying to represent for DACA students on campuses, how loud you feel our voices should be, or how relatively low you feel our voices should be in order to help our fellow DACA students.
I think, thank you for your question. Like, I think that's a big step, like seeing like what you can do as an ally and not like going in and like doing things on your own, what you think would be the best, but asking like for guidance. I think a big thing is like when I think of my allies, like I love when they can support us, where they can plug us in, where our voices can be heard. So I think what you can do is like be that megaphone to those voices of undocumented students. If there's someone who doesn't feel comfortable sharing their story, be that person who could be there to share their story. Be able to speak to many different dreamers, different undocumented students, because there's different stories, different narratives, but always be like that megaphone that highlights their voices, that highlights their stories, and share that with Congress. Tell them like why we need a Clean Dream Act. And share like all the stories, all the narratives that you hear like on your campus, around your network. And I think that's a great way like to highlight those voices, highlight those stories.
I'm going to add, and there are different ways in how you can be an ally, right? And so one of the things that we do is we train our whoever wants to come and become an ally for us. And what we do is we first start by teaching them terminology, things to say, things not to say. The word illegal, we don't use it. And so when we hear people use it, we teach them how to be able to have the conversation in a respectful way where we're telling you, this is what you're doing wrong and this is how we need to communicate better in the kind of language that you use. And then we go ahead and tell them, you know, what are your capabilities? Are you an ally who has rights for a newspaper? Are you an ally who has money to donate for food for one of our meetings? How can you support the movement? And if none of that, it's something that you can do just by attending meetings and being present and being able to just share that information. It's very helpful. What we've done with our student network, it's what, you know, we have this citywide events where we just go and give out flyers about information of legal services and scholarships in the train stations in predominantly immigrant neighborhoods. And allies come and like they are there at 7 a.m. in the morning with us giving out flyers. And us having that conversation with someone who's not undocumented, we grow because we know what you're thinking. And as an ally, you grow and know what we're thinking. So it's about having that conversation and honestly taking the first step and saying, how do I become an ally?
And if I can add a little bit to that as well, thank you for asking that really great question. I'm documented, and a part of my job is communicating with other documented allies of what we can do in our universities and in the larger community. And at Freedom U, we also use a liberatory education model based on the teachings of Paulo Freire, which is not that people are acting out of charity for undocumented young people, but finding ways that our liberation is tied together, right? And the undocumented struggle intersects with prison and detention reform, racial profiling, right, with LGBTQ issues. These are intersecting issues. Some people are shaking their heads in the front row, but they're absolutely intersecting issues, right? The same private corporations that benefit off of the incarceration of young Black people in this country also run the detention centers, right, and the mass detention centers like Stewart Detention Center in Georgia. So these are ways we can actually bring our movements together and fight together. And specifically at our campaign at Emory University, it was really crucial to have documented students who are already enrolled at Emory help advocate, because universities can easily say, these are outside agitators, right? These aren't our students. Yeah. So your voice is actually very important in being a student at a university and saying, people are missing from my classroom. This impacts me and I have a voice in this, right? This is an issue of modern segregation in our universities where people are now being banned based on a social status out of their control and not on their academic merit, right? And that is how your voice and exactly who you are, where you have power and how you can leverage that to help advance the undocumented student struggle.
And you're a young woman, and I sort of do a little bit of work in training young women to run for office. Run for office. Yes. Get them out of office so then we're represented.
Right there, third row.
I just have a quick question. I'm Kristen and from First Focus, a children's advocacy. So in terms of policy, when we're kind of talking about this, my fear has been, while I am one of those that would love to see a bigger package, a bigger reform, we kind of talked about hitting pieces at a time. How do we talk about this or advocate for the DREAM Act without pushing this like good immigrant versus bad immigrant kind of conversation? So can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so the work that we do is we make sure the voices are at the table. As you guys probably see a lot even the immigrant movement is often portrayed as this Latino issue, right? So we make sure that we are giving the space as a young Latina, brown. I know that I have, this image of like, this is who she is, right? And then I make sure that I give that a space to somebody else so then they can advocate for that. But what we do is, one, you get educated on all these policies, and then two, what we do is make sure that we are bringing everybody to the table, or as many people as willing to come, as many people as there are in the place where you work at to come to the table. It's not, if they don't show up, it's on them. But you did your best to make sure that you reach out to them. And that's what we do. We literally make phone calls, emails, Twitter, we stalk everybody. We make sure that we do everything that we have so then they can come to the table. And actually, within a couple of more weeks, we're going to be announcing a bigger and brighter coalition of undocumented immigrants in New York that's going to be very focused and building a foundation in New York. Great, we want to talk about the DREAM Act, let's do it. But are we protected? Look what happened with DACA. And as you mentioned, and I'm happy you did, the fact that we no longer have DACA is a wake-up call, not only for universities, but our city agencies, our governors, our senators, to understand that they do need these small pieces of legislation like the New York State DREAM Act that will give access to the tuition system program for undocumented immigrants. And so then now that they're going to lose their only way of income, they can get scholarships from the city or the state, or the university now can give them scholarships to finish their education. So why are we looking just at the federal government when we can also look at the state, at the city, at our local organizations to help us advocate for educational policies that will allow us to continue with our education, but also feel safe within our own city and state.
I think we have time for just one final question. There in the back on the right.
My name is Rose. Like Nico, I have the unique pleasure of working with undocumented students. I'm the director of undocumented student services at Georgetown University. Hi, Juan. So the reality is that I'm in spaces a lot with educators and administrators about what it means for us to start reversing conversations and reversing trends in the narrative, and specifically the narrative around the parent, which as of 1982, Plyler versus Doe, the Supreme Court remark said specifically, we're not going to penalize the students for the crimes of the parent, right? So I try to reverse that conversation a lot because I really do try to redirect that focus back to not only foreign policy interventionism on behalf of the US, but specifically issues as they relate to why people cross in the first place and why we are forced to cross. And I really do want to hear from you all how you help to reverse this narrative as well, because our parents are technically our heroes, right? There are a number of conversations around foreign policy and how state-sponsored wars affected massive migration crises. So how do you reverse that trend as well? Because for me, this is a very, very specific talking point when speaking to my peers and to neighboring universities. You reverse the narrative.
Yeah. Okay. So the way that we did it for us is, first, these conversations are not happening necessarily from the students to these administrators, right? Where the students are not often, all of them telling them, this is how I talk about, how my father or my mother crossed the border, and this is why they did it. Because those conversations are not even happening between the students and their parents. So what we did to increase this conversation and build a narrative that we are all dreamers, so we're all here because we wanted a better future for all of us, is making sure that they're having these conversations at home and appreciating that their parents are doing work for their kids as well. And so, we encourage them to go get frozen yogurt with their parents and start helping each other and talk about this conversation, because we don't talk about them and it's hard to talk about them. And then the other thing that our city provided recently is a mental health online call for people to call in and talk about, what it feels like to be undocumented, what it feels like not to be able to talk to your parents about this. And our university has counseling centers throughout the 24 CUNY campuses where they can go and talk about this, and so they can start building their relationship with their parents. So our way to go was, they cannot keep hearing it from me, they have to hear from all of us. And so by us having those conversations at home, then we bring those stories. I mean, it took years for me to even talk about my own experience with my parents, because as an organizer, as many people that start organizing in the movement, our parents are terrified that we're going to get deported. And so I had to build the relationship and the courage through frozen yogurt with my parents, so then we can talk about, you know, what it feels like to be undocumented. Mom, I'm sorry that you didn't know by bringing me here actually didn't help me. But we're here, we're gonna fight together, this is what we're gonna do. And you know, and this is sort of like building that connection with your parents, and when you start talking, you know, my mother had this saying of algún día, someday, and that's sort of like the way that I do my work now. You know what, doesn't matter, today didn't work, tomorrow it will. Like, we gotta keep pushing, because algún día we're gonna be able to be citizens, algún día we're gonna be able to see our community properly represented everywhere. And that's the way that we bring and build a new narrative, a new conversation.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining with us today. Round of applause for our panelists. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.